Yeah. Okay, there we go. And the recording starts. Thank you for reminding me. So this will be recorded for anybody who wants to look at this later, or anybody who could attend this and wants to watch it. So let's get started though. Collaboration and teamwork. So I guess let's start with, what is teamwork? Tony here's got a great one. Ideal situation for pair programming. That's a good one. Does anyone else have anything they think of teamwork, like any examples, or when you think of teamwork, what's words you associate with it? Feel free to put it in chat, speak out loud if you want to. Give me a thumbs up. Compromise, okay, I like compromise. Collaboration, also a great one. Brainstorming, great one too. So I agree with all those words. I think teamwork is sort of a collection. It is literally the teamwork. It is teaming of multiple things together to get you what ends up being teamwork. So let's take this picture, for example. On the outside, you're looking at this like, oh, it's just a group of ants. But then you sort of think about it. These ants are using each other to form a bridge. You know, they got ants that are all working together to get across to this other leaf. They've got ants that are walking across them to go and retrieve food, water, whatever they need, all working together. And they all sort of know their roles. More coordination than companies. There you go. This is basically, in my mind, I think ants, bees, a lot of those insects are kind of a perfect example of teamwork, because they all know what they're doing. They all have an idea of what they're doing, and they all know what their ultimate goal is. Their ultimate goal is, we need to survive, we need food, we need water, we need to work together to get that spot. So ants and bees, for example, are a great example of teamwork, but they're not a great example of brainstorming and coming up with new ideas, because quite frankly, ants kind of all share the same ideas. And I should have put this aside, but there is actually something called the spiral of death, where ants' teamwork sort of confuses them, and they literally run around in a circle until they all die. It's kind of vivid, but it's what happens when there is no difference of opinion and ideology. They get stuck in this funnel. They don't really know what to do. They don't know how to change. So let's talk about the next thing I think that's really important to teamwork, and that would be difference. We all have different ideas. We all have different perspectives. We have different ways of saying things. Even the presentation you're watching now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't fully script this. And part of the reason I didn't fully script it is I felt like every time I gave this presentation, if I were to give it again, I would almost want to give it a different style, a different way, because I feel like it's better that it's always a little bit different, so it's not always the same. There's always something new that you could pull out of it. So different makes teams overall better too, though. Can you give me some, we talked about compromise. I saw that in the chat pop up 1 or 2 times. Compromise is really important. And the idea of compromise is neither side is really happy with what came out of it, but overall, it's sort of not one side or the other. Overall, it gives you sort of that middle ground, sort of the area where everyone can meet. An example I use for this, well, it's a dog and a cat. I mean, dogs and cats are not friends. I think y'all maybe have seen Tom and Jerry, whether the new one or the old one. And, you know, Tom is always after Jerry. They don't like each other. But then once in a while, we see them team up together. And you can see in this picture right here, we've got the dog and we've got the cat. And the cat's like, listen, we're going to find your bone. We're going to find it in the backyard. And I think this is sort of conclusive to the idea that differences can make a difference in ideology, different in perspective, different ways of saying things. They can all make a huge difference. A good example, ACM cat. I mean, we all agree ACM cat is awesome, but we all may see it a little bit different. But I think that's important. And when you're in a team, there's going to be times you're going to disagree with somebody, but disagreement is not a bad thing. You can really get a lot out of disagreement. Even take it like this. Even if the person's ideology is an entirely different, a whole new perspective, it can give so much more to an idea. I mean, think about it this way. There's sometimes you might be like, I'm stuck on this idea. This idea is great. I really want to get it done. I know it's the most efficient way to do it. And somebody's like, well, what about this other side of it? You know, how's it going to work with this? And you're like, oh, that's a good point. Like, because you were so stuck on that idea, or even maybe not even stuck, maybe just tunnel vision. I mean, I'll be honest, I think we've all been tunnel visioned before. It's one of those things, we get so stuck on this idea that we have in our mind, this is the way it's supposed to be. And then when it's not, we can't really see past that. But then somebody else who maybe is a little bit, partial is the wrong word, but maybe just a little bit more, they're not as involved in it. They have less stake in it. They might be like, oh, that's not really how that's going to work. And you're like, oh, So differences can make a huge difference in teams. And honestly, you should welcome differences because they will make such a big difference and they will make sometimes bad, sometimes good. But I think I've seen more good than bad when it comes from teams. Also, we've got all these fun little animations because I thought it'd be more fun. So we all went through the 2020 pandemic, that is COVID-19, as the most fun time I think we've all had, obviously. But I think this past year has also served as a great way to see who really has great teams. Because when you see a great team, even through the pandemic, they're still operating and still going and they're still coming up with new innovative ideas and everything. So in recent times, can you think of some amazing examples of teams you've seen in the news or at school, even if you like are in a club and you've seen amazing works of teamwork? Can you think of any examples and just throw them in the chat or say them out loud, whichever you prefer? Some people creating a food bank. That's a great one. I mean, that's something it's a necessity and something that everybody needs. But a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, it was hard to get, especially as markets were struggling to even get supplies. So that's really awesome to hear that some people were coordinating to really make that work. Create the vaccine. That was an endeavor in itself. I mean, the amount of companies and people and the brilliance behind a lot of those people working together to get that put together in, quite frankly, a pretty timely fashion. And then get it tested and everything too. I can't imagine the logistics and thinking that had to go into a lot of those procedures. Does anybody else have any examples that they can think of? It can be from anywhere. It can be within your own family. If your family had this awesome team collaboration, ACM teamwork to put on events, healthcare workers helping patients, these are all great examples. Yeah, I totally agree with everything you guys are saying. It's one of those things of the pandemic, while it's definitely had its low points. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was a rough year and we're still coming out of it. I mean, vaccines are now available as of today. It's Wednesday, so you should definitely sign up if you haven't already. But agree with all those. We've seen a lot of amazing teamwork from this pandemic. I think it is one of sort of the bright spots of the pandemic, seeing how people work together and really help their communities, their classmates, their families. I think it just goes to show that when you work as a team, anything can happen. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's talk. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, so we'll go ahead and just move on to the next slide. But I kind of go with some words, I guess more just generic words. I put trust on here. We've got time commitment, expectations, and then we've got commitment. The pigeons have nothing to do with commitment. I thought it was just kind of funny. They came up with all these synonyms for commitment. So all of these in my mind are what kind of builds our teamwork here. I think it's important that you have trust in your team. Because here's the thing. No matter what kind of team you have, I imagine if you can't trust any of your teammates, how likely are you to all work together? I mean, just throw in the chat. If you couldn't trust your teammates, how would your team work? Throw up what you think would happen. I mean, for one, just from this picture alone, if you don't trust your teammates, you're going to hit the ground pretty hard. I think that's, pretty hard. If you can't trust them to catch you in midair, you're probably just going to hit the ground. And it's going to hurt real bad. Maybe you can have to go to the hospital because you got hurt. If time management. Sorry, I feel like time management is real important. You can't split the work. Yeah, that's true. You can't delegate any work, and then it might just fall on one person, or maybe just not even get done at all. Free writing. It's true. In economics, there is always the free writing issue. I don't know how many people here are taking economics or an economics major. There's always the issue of free writing, though, in society, where no matter how much you do, there's always going to be that thing of somebody's going to free write off of it. But I think if you can trust your teammates, that makes a huge difference, and everyone's a little bit more accountable in that sense. So next one is time management. Now, time management on an individual level is just as important as a team level. If you say, as an individual, you say, okay, I have a deadline for this assignment, it's a 8-page essay, and you decide to do it 8 hours before the due time, you're probably not going to have a really good time. And you could probably get it done. Don't get me wrong. It won't be your highest quality work. But I think Time management in a team is pretty important too, though. Kind of relates to trust. It's like, yeah, that's true. Psychological safety. That's a very good point. I mean, if you don't feel like safe, I don't want to say you couldn't feel safe with your teammates, but you definitely might be like, the more and more they break your trust, you're like, I don't really, even want to be around them. I don't really, I don't know what they're going to do. Like, yeah, that's a great one too. I didn't even think about it from that angle at all. But again, that's why differences make an awesome team. Gives new perspective. So, but time management is important too, though, because if your team can't establish deadlines or nobody can enforce those deadlines, it's going to be really hard to get anything done. Let's say you're like, okay, let's say, Frank, I need you to get this thing done by Sunday, because if you don't, then Susan can get this thing done by Wednesday. Because if you can't plan out those deadlines, if you can't set a time that all of you can work together, even just a team meeting, funnily enough, I think this pandemic has shown it's really important to be able to meet with your team. Because if you can't meet with your team and set those deadlines, or even set some expectation of deadlines, things just don't get done. Not because people don't want to get them done, it's because what's their incentive to get it done? There's nothing there. There's no, I guess, check off the list per se, which is pretty important for a team when you have multiple people with multiple different goals and ideas of what the goal, the product should be at the end. If doesn't have a deadline or a calendar attached to it or a checklist attached, it's going to be really difficult to get anything done on a timely basis, if at all. But let's move on to the next one of expectations. So this is sort of similar to trust in the same sense, but I think the way I think of expectations is more of a quality thing. So for example, let's say we have good time management, we have good trust, we know people are going to get things done. But what if somebody doesn't do a very good job in doing it? What if you have this idea of what it should be? Like, there are rules to follow and the person breaks the rules to get their thing done. I think there is some level of expectation of what you're expecting from your teammates, both as individuals. If you're friends, you have expectations of your friends to act a certain way, to give you a certain amount of respect, and they expect a certain amount from you as well. I think it is very much the same with your team. You have a certain expectation of what your team should be, not only what your team as a whole should be, but also what the individuals in your team should be. And breaking that sort of also breaks trust. And if you expect someone to get something done on time, well, that falls under time management. It's sort of one of those things that you sort of begin to see things begin tying together a little bit. You expect a certain baseline from your team, a certain standard, And then the last one is commitment. Now, I think this is one of the ones that is the most fundamentally important. I think, especially, okay, so these courses were created specifically for the projects teams. And the reason we create these courses, well, because the expectation is if you submitted an application and you joined the projects teams, that you are committing yourself to it. You're committing yourself not only to the projects, system at ACM, you're also committing yourself to your team. And they do, I imagine everyone expects, okay, they all put in the same amount of time to me, I'm going to expect them to put in the same amount of effort as I am. And, some people's work ethics are a little bit different. You have people that are sort of the people that are going from 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. Students all know that here, up all nights, class during the day. And then you've also got people though that maybe a little bit, they don't really do that way. They might put in less time. Maybe they're 9 to 5. They say after 5, I'm not doing any more work because the rest of the day is for me. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. But what I am saying for teamwork, though, there should be what's called a commitment conversation. That idea that you can openly say, okay, listen, after 5 or 6, maybe even after like 8, I don't really want to do any more work. I want that to be me time. I want that to be able to spend time with my loved ones or watch YouTube or read a book, do something else that isn't work, to be quite frank, or school for the matter. And I think there is that thing of commitment of, so not so much of saying, okay, there is that expectation of you're committed to your team, but also that commitment to say, okay, I need to put this out there. I need to talk about it. I need to tell them what my expectation of commitment is for them, but also for me. So I feel like that's really important to establish a strong foundation for your team, is being able to talk about that and also being able to say, listen, I'm committed to this and I want to get it done, but I'm going to tell you right now, this is what I'm willing to commit. This is how I'm going to commit. If you do it different, we can talk about that too, but being open to actually talk about that. So these 4 things I feel like are pretty foundational for building a really strong team. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is, I think, something that is also pretty important to building a great team. And for me, this is feedback. Now, I think when people, actually, let's ask. When you hear the term feedback, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Just first thing, just type it in chat. Say it if you want to. Just throw it out there. Constructive criticism, okay. Finished project, constructive. I'm seeing a lot of constructive criticism here. Okay. Yeah, I think, and you know what? I think that's the first thing a lot of people think of when they think of feedback. And even this picture here, you can actually see this is actually for a customer survey type thing where you're sending a product out, you're getting ratings, you're getting opinions. A lot of I think it's seen as a constructive criticism a lot of time. And you know what? To be entirely fair, that's what feedback is. I think if someone is underperforming or someone isn't doing quite as well as you expect them to be doing, or maybe they're not showing up for meetings, or there's something there that you're kind of like, I'm not really, what's going on here? I think that's one of those things. If you go to them and you say, hey, I have some feedback, I feel that something's off, can we talk about it? And I think that's the first thing that people go to when they think of feedback. But I will say, and I'm going to be honest here, this is from one of my previous jobs. I see feedback as both it can be constructive criticism, or it can literally just be you saying you're doing a great job. I think this idea of feedback only being for constructive criticism, I think we can shift that a little bit, because I see feedback as something as saying you're doing a great job too, though. And the reason I say that is, think of it this way. If somebody's putting a lot of work in, let's say one of your teammates has spent a lot of time, they've been spending long nights building out your product, or maybe building out marketing or something like that, and they don't get, I guess, that response of, hey, you're doing a great job, or this looks great. They might feel that, well, their work either wasn't good enough, and then all of a sudden they're doubting themselves, or that maybe their team just doesn't notice what they're doing. So I think it's important to also, have that idea of feedback can be you literally saying, hey, your work looks really good, I really love the look of it. Or even just, you're putting a lot of hours in, you're doing a great job if you ever need help or anything like that. I think that's important to put that out there, because it does say to that other person, oh, someone is acknowledging what I'm doing here. But it is also important, if somebody's underperforming, that you're able to have that conversation. So how do you have that conversation with somebody, though? Because it's really easy for that person to maybe get defensive about it. They might feel, oh, this person, calling me out for something. And I think an easy way to start the conversation is to literally say, hey, I have some feedback for you. Start like that. And again, if our idea holds that it could be good or bad, that conversation goes a lot easier. And I'm hoping a lot of people, especially in this project team system, will be a little bit more open to that. And hopefully people in just your life are okay with you saying, hey, I have some feedback, or even, I feel that this is not going particularly well, can we talk about it? Like, just having that conversation, being able to have that conversation. Because again, as we said, difference is what makes teams really strong. And again, it's also one of the things that can cause the most arguments. But being able to have that conversation and lay it out, and be able to talk to somebody and tell them, hey, I'm not really feeling this, or even just, hey, you're doing a great job, can make all the difference in that layer of communication that often gets misconstrued. So with that in mind, let's approach the next topic. Oh, this was my whole thing with feedback to improve something. So there you go, my little people there. That's going to fade away. But the next big topic about teamwork is leadership. Now, leadership is going to be, it's one of those things of, we'll take companies as an example. There's a lot of companies that say, well, leadership should be on the same level as everybody else. And there's a lot of people that say, well, no, you report to a leader, do one or the other. So let's have a little bit of a conversation about this. When you hear the word leadership, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be the leader of a team, or just a leader? What does it mean to be a leader in your minds? Feel free to throw it in chat. People report to the leader. Yep. And I honestly think that's the way that you sort of always see a leader, at least early on, provides direction. That's definitely an important one. We'll come back around to that guy. So, an example for direction, depending on setting, a good place to go for feedback. That's actually a really great one. I love to see that. So let's go ahead and let's pull up our Google definition of what is leadership. So this is how Google, if you look up the leadership definition, this is actually what Google says. An action of leading a group of people or an organization. And honestly, if you take that at face value, that is kind of what a leader is. They sort of do, as actually from the chat here, a leader provides direction. And I definitely think that's true. I think it is a leader's job to sort of steer the organization or team in a certain direction. So leadership is one of those things to me. I actually like this picture a lot. It is a person, they're holding the flag and they're sort of leading the way. They're the first one in. And I do see leadership as a very exemplar role. You're supposed to establish, okay, what are the standards? What's the baselines? What's the rules that everyone else should be following? And they should sort of lead by example, is the way I like to say it. But I will say, I'm not a huge fan of the leader on the same level of everyone else. Not because I think a leader is higher than anyone else, but I think, as we said, I think leaders should be leading in a direction, though. They should be the first person to lead by example. They should be the ones that are, for all intents and purposes, giving feedback the most. Now, granted, I'm not saying a teammate couldn't give feedback. I actually think on that level, every person should be able to give feedback. I think even a teammate giving feedback to their leader is important, because sometimes a leader in their position may not see it the same way as their teammates do, because quite frankly, their viewpoint is going to be a little bit different from everybody else. A lot of times they do have the bigger picture. Not bad or good thing, it just tends to be how it is. So, but I think from the perspective of from being a leader, it is more important that you're able to listen to your team. And I think it's also important that your team sees you as a leader. And one of the things I kind of want to go into a little bit is just the idea of when there are two people that are trying to be a leader in your team, it can create some conflict, especially if you've got two people who really do feel that they are a stronger leader than the other. You are definitely going to have some issues. And it's not a bad thing to have that conflict. Sometimes it is good for a team to say, okay, let's hash this out a little bit. Who would be a better leader? And it's not to say that one person's a better leader than the other. It might just be that one person has a better idea of what the project is. I think an important part about being a leader is being able to recognize that you are not going to be the best at everything. One of the things I said is leading by example. And but you're not always going to be the best at being the example. A good example. If you're building your team and you need very specialized people for certain projects. For example, you need someone who can be a designer. You need somebody who can do UI on a website. You need somebody who knows how to market an item. Somebody who knows how to use social media. We go down the list here of all these different specializations. And quite frankly, while it may be important for the leader to understand what their team is doing, for example, I think that you're not going to be able to understand how the different complementary colors work on an art design. You may not know that. You may have no idea what that actually means, to be honest. But it's not important for you to understand that. It is important for you to be able to say, okay, cool. We have this. I need this logo done, and I need to be able to post it to all the social media. So I'm gonna have our designer work on the logo. I'll have our social media designer post it on the website and see if it's the right, resolution for the profile pictures and all that sort of thing. It's important to understand how those work, but you don't need to be an expert on everything, because if you try to do that, you are going to burn yourself out, and very quickly you're probably going to do a good job in alienating your team, who now thinks that maybe the leader just doesn't trust them with their role. This kind of goes back to that whole trust argument. You need to be able to trust your team, and if you are like, okay, I know my team is great at what they do, I'm going to let them do their thing, and I'm going to, again, guide the ship a little bit. So I think that's what's important about leadership. And again, leader delivering feedback can be a very powerful thing, but also keep that in mind. You are the leader compared to everyone else. Everyone else can give feedback to each other and they're sort of on the same level. So they could either disregard, they might take that a little bit more suggestive. Not a bad or good thing. That just tends to be how it is. But when a leader delivers feedback, that's a big thing. That means the leader is stepping in to give that feedback where it's going to hold, it's just going to hold a lot more weight than anybody else. So let's go ahead then. And now let's put all our pieces together here. We've got leadership, we've got time management, we've got feedback, we've got expectation, and we have trust and commitment. So all together, these things kind of don't seem like they go together, but slowly you put them together and you kind of get your teamwork. You get your house of teamwork. And there you go. And that's all put together in a nice, neat little package. And I'm going to be fair to you, it's not easy. It is one of those things that's going to take time, and especially when you first all meet each other, it's going to be a little awkward. Things like icebreakers, even just pre-pandemic going out for lunch or a dinner or something and all meeting each other is really helpful to help build your team, because then your team learns how to be around each other. They learn how to interact and how to be friends with each other, how to give feedback to each other. Those are really hard things, especially if you barely know somebody. You're probably not going to want to trust somebody that you just met. That's just frankly how the world works. But being able to establish your team and build these foundational structures first will make a really strong household that you all can work together with. And especially for the projects teams, you guys are on a very tight deadline of, I think it's something like 7 weeks to really get something out. So it's gonna be important that you establish these really early on so that later something doesn't happen that leads you to have to reevaluate your team and rebuild it. Because even one thing that's not foundationally strong can very quickly lead to you missing a deadline or your project not getting done on time. And then it's kind of worse for everybody. So with that sort of in mind, then here's some brain food to think about. Is there really anything that you're learning that's new here, though? I'm gonna be honest. When I was putting this together, I was sort of like, this is one of those things that my entire life I've sort of been practicing, and I imagine most people are in the same boat where you've sort of been practicing teamwork within your classes. I mean, say what you will about group projects. Trust me, I know group projects are not the most fun, but they do force you to work with people that you probably never met before and have to actually learn how to build a really quick team around them. Maybe not the best team, but it does force you to actually work with them. So what I really want you to take away from this whole presentation is that to build a team, it is down to building with the individuals. It is learning about the individuals and learning about who's on your team, who's good at what, who has strengths where's your specialization. It's really about figuring that out, but then also being able to say, okay, I'm not that good at this. I think this person can be much better than I am at this than I could ever be. Not because you couldn't get better at it, but quite frankly, because you just don't enjoy it. That's a big thing. So being able to build a team and build that strong foundation early on is really important. And I would say out of all the reason we started with this workshop is when you're introduced to your team, it's going to be one of the first things you do with people you've probably never met before. You're going to have to learn how to build a team with them. You're going to have to learn how to collaborate with them. You're going to have to learn how to talk with them and really understand where they're coming from, their different perspectives, ideologies, the way they say things. You're going to have to learn that, and you're going to have to work with that. And again, but also don't be afraid to give feedback. Feedback is really important, not just for the team as a whole, but as individuals. We often learn the most when we're being told, maybe not that we're doing something wrong, but maybe just the way we're saying things is different from how somebody else understands it. That's how we learn a lot of the time. It is one of those things that we get better at. I remember at my old job, one of the first interactions with the customer I messed up pretty badly, and I hurt that customer's trust in me. It was a mistake, but I didn't know at the time. But now, even to this day, I'm not even at that job anymore, and I still remember that interaction, because even if it wasn't direct feedback, the customer gave me feedback of something I was doing wrong, and I still remember that as my first interaction. And it's one of those things you're going to learn as you go more and more into your team and you interact more with your teammates and learn how to work with them. It's just one of those things that it's going to take time to really build that. Actually, I'll even put this: you will probably never build a perfect house, but you can build a house that's pretty damn close to perfect and has good structure, and you don't have to worry about it halfway through your team, your product, or your service breaking down because your teamwork fell apart. That is one of the things that's just going to take time. So there's a really great quote from Henry Ford. Coming together is beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is a success. And I'll put it like this, dude. Even at the end of this project, if your product or service or idea isn't fully done or fleshed out yet, if you built a great team, you've already made it farther than most people do. It's really hard to put a good team together, or even people that have actually no direct interactions with each other. It's really hard to put something like together and have it last. So if you can get it to last through the whole quarter and everyone's, not even love each other, but everyone's willing to work together and delegate to each other, everyone's happy on your team, you already made it farther than most, and you should be proud of that. So this is the end of the presentation right here. But I do hope you all enjoyed this, and even if you got nothing out of it, I am hoping that being able to see people in here that are maybe on your project's team, you're like, okay, this person is absolutely committed. Or even people on other teams, you're like, man, now I have something to live up to. I know that person's in here too, and we're all working together. So that's the end of my presentation. But if you do have any questions or you just want to talk, I'll be here for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long you want me to be here. We have an hour. We think we have till 4. So I do hope you guys enjoyed it, though. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.